Welcome back to the Firebreak. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Firebreak is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing some innovative technology for battling tomorrow's fires, which have gotten here today, by the way. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. I have got Elizabeth Pickett with us on the show today. Elizabeth is the Executive Director of Wildfire Mitigation and Collaboration in Hawaii and the Pacific, which is a pretty big area. Elizabeth, welcome to the Firebreak. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me a little bit about what you do, and I'm glad you joined.
All right. So what do? I have been with a nonprofit in Hawaii for 17 years, but the nonprofit has actually existed for 24 years. And it was founded by a diverse group of folks who came together when they started to notice that wildfires were increasing in Hawaii. And these were fire departments, land managers, conservation folks, ranchers, and they looked around to figure out who was studying wildfire in Hawaii and who was working on mitigation and prevention and all the things, and realized that there wasn't anything going on. And so they founded our nonprofit to be proactive, to be multi-partner, to work on protecting communities and natural resources concurrently from wildfire, and to develop the necessary information and research to support that. So they were really building what Hawaii has in that space. And I came in 2007, and I've been there ever since and worked my way up. And I'm one of two executive directors at the organization.
Wow. Okay, so tell me about the mission and the challenges.
Well, our mission, it started off very simple, like just protect Hawaii's communities and natural resources from wildfire. But what
Okay.
that turned into over the years has been to, well, we've become the hub of many things wildfire, especially on the prevention and pre-suppression side of things. So our role has shifted over the years. In the beginning, we were just on the west side of Hawaii Island, and we were working on fuel breaks, on education, mostly fuels management, and just trying to figure out the lay of the land. We did some research. We were really just starting up. But it happened to be that the very first project that the organization completed was a fuel break around one community on the west side of Hawaii Island. And it was finished. It was our first project, and it was finished 5 days before the biggest fire in state history came through. And it was the only thing that gave firefighters the access they needed to keep the fire off the community. And as soon as that happened and people started to see the utility in it, our organization was requested to start working outside of that very small area. And
Right.
then we went island wide and we went statewide. And so now, while the mission has remained the same, instead of actively doing the fuel breaks and actively, like my first job, I was spraying herbicide. I mean, I was on the ground, I was a field crew. And now our role is more like running the programs that our communities engage in and bringing our fire agencies together so that all of our counties have the same messaging, so that we're all in it together. So we host and coordinate a lot of collaborative efforts. And then we're starting to play a role in the policy space as well, because now we're 24 years in. And so
Wow.
yeah, so our role has changed over time, but always still with that central goal of, um, enhancing, or just really working on risk reduction and enhancing preparedness for wildfire events, especially as the risk has been massively increasing over time. And our scope about 10 years ago started to also include our island neighbors that are not Hawaii, but in the Western Pacific, there's a lot of wildfire risk as well. And there's also no other entity working in that space. And so we've started to do a lot of work with our Western Pacific Island partners.
And are the topographies, climates, and vegetations in those other places similar enough that what you've learned applies there?
Yeah, I think so. For in terms of the fire landscape, the fuels, all of that sort of stuff, yes, absolutely. Culturally, languages, time zones, no way. So we've really been learning how to navigate all of that. So we run a wildfire network for Pacific Island areas. And that's been really cool. But, it spans like 6 time zones and a lot of different cultures and languages. And that's been a really special part of this work. But the drivers of wildfire, increased drought episodes, bigger and more frequent storms, pulse rain events that grow a lot of vegetation, and then drought events that dry it all out. Some
Right.
of those are the same across many islands in the Pacific. And so we're dealing with that. And also, we've had a lot of invasive species come in that are fire prone. And so the ecosystem pressures are similar. And then in all of these places, it's not lava or lightning causing these fires. It's at least 99% human caused.
Sure. Right.
So the
Now,
very similar. Yeah.
right. So it plays out pretty much the same as everywhere.
Yeah.
People. Uh,
Yes.
so I'm curious about this thing about, the 1%, the 1%ers, right? Which are the people causing the fires. If people didn't cause the fires, then would those areas just tend to overgrow and become over fuel abundant, or or
Yeah.
would they self level?
They so our ecosystems in Hawaii and the Pacific are not fire adapted or fire dependent. And so left to their own, they actually don't naturally have fire. So when there are native ecosystems intact and in place, it's not really there's enough precipitation and humidity and our natural species, and there's no lightning starting fires kind of thing that we
I
just
see.
wouldn't have fire. But then because we've had invasive species, because we've had a lot of drying out of our climate, and you add humans in, that's where all the problems start to arise. And so, yeah, less than 1% is lava or lightning, so it's not zero. And then, so there is a history of a tiny bit of fire in Hawaii, but
Okay.
for the most part, at this stage, we have a lot of fuels that are fire prone, and they're just like fire adapted and ready to ignite. And so the fact that we drive cars, we use equipment, we have
Right.
campfire, all those things, those are really what cause the ignitions of our fire. But once those ignitions hit these invaded, dried out, sort of fuel loaded landscapes, then that's really where we have our issues.
So is there an effort to mitigate invasive species?
Oh yeah. And so
What does that look like?
for decades, we've had ecologists and conservation folks and watershed partners really trying to get on top of managing invasive species. Our fire prone species are a little bit are a subset of that, which is, we had our native landscape, which I already described, our native ecosystems, which were not adapted or needing fire, having much fire. But then we were colonized, and a lot of our landscapes were converted to agriculture. So we had pineapple and sugar. But when those markets were no longer supporting all that active agriculture, those industries left, and they left kind of denuded landscapes that were easily invaded by fire prone grasses.
I
And
see.
it's actually not our native forests that are really fire prone or burning. It's that grassland and fallow, non-active agriculture that now has been bought up by a patchwork of private landowners, probably sitting on it for development. They're like speculators, but it's not in active agriculture, and it's not in our native ecosystem kind of situation. It's just sitting there.
For
Um,
squatters.
growing fire risk. And so
I see.
so that's where our fuels really lay.
Okay. So you're putting fire breaks between those plots and
As
the
we
native
can,
vegetation?
we don't
Yeah.
really have we don't have national forest here, and we don't have like, this is like a patchwork of private owners. And so how much we can get done entirely relies on permission from the landowners, on if they want to be good stewards. Most of them are sitting on the land and don't really want to spend money on it. And so
Uh-huh.
there's been a challenge with some of the larger landowners being involved in mitigation, or being even willing, like for them to even be willing to let us have access to put in fire and fuel breaks. So it's an ongoing challenge, because the system here is currently protecting the right of folks to do nothing, and we want to see
Uh-huh.
safety be front and center where that's a mandate.
Okay, so you're trying to get some laws changed in your favor there.
Yes, please.
Well, you thought it was hard to fight wildfires. Wait till you try changing laws, right?
But a lot of what we can do is on the like voluntary compliance side of things. So we work with our state forestry, and together we implement the Firewise Communities program. Prior to Lahaina burning, we thought we were moving and grooving. We had 19 communities who have already embraced and have been nationally recognized Firewise communities. And then since that time, that number has quadrupled
I
statewide.
bet. Yeah.
So we have communities and residents taking action. We have some very willing and good like landowners and ranchers and farmers and willing landowners doing the best they can do for their fuels mitigation. But in addition to not really having a supportive policy environment, we don't really have a supportive funding environment. So there's a lot of very willing and wanting residents and landowners who want to do this work, but they're capacity limited. And so we're really trying to figure out what we can do besides competing against the rest of the country for risk reduction grants. We need to have local sources of funding where we can support that kind of work too. So we're working in that space as well.
So, but the publicity that Lahaina fire generated should have moved you to the top of a lot of people's lists in terms of providing resources, providing recovery, providing grants for future mitigation activity.
Yeah,
Right?
it's a mixed bag. We thought it was like the ultimate game changer, and
Right.
it's all the way shaping up like that. I think so much focus has been on recovery, understandably, on recovery because there's a lot of hardship currently. But most people don't realize Lahaina burned, but there were 6 fires that day. We lost 20 homes in 𝐾𝐿. We lost a hotel building on the Big Island. I mean, there were fires statewide all in the same day. And I think Lahaina got a lot of publicity because of the loss of human lives and
Yeah.
structures. But actually, fire's not new and there's risk statewide. And that is the story we've been trying to pivot to, which is if we want to be preventative, and we have to be proactive, and we have to acknowledge the fact that the risk is statewide on every island.
Right.
This is not just a story about recovery from a fluke incident. We have ongoing risk, and it's all over the place. And so a lot of the attention has gone to recovery and not into prevention and into preparedness. And we're really trying to like shift some of that conversation over, not to the detriment of the recovery folks, but
Right.
just to acknowledge, because even people who lost their homes, say in 𝐾𝐿, felt bad that they had need because Lahaina seemed so bad. And then other folks who
Okay.
had their lands burned or their agricultural lands or their animals were impacted from other fires felt bad, like, taking any sort of time or attention away from like the bigger story. But there were other folks impacted. And then there are certainly lots and lots of people that are scared because they look around, they see that they're on the edge of the same grasslands. They
Right.
know they've had fires in the past. And so our organization kind of caught all of the non-impacted community members and landowners who were really scared and wanting to take preventative action, while all the attention and funding has gone to recovery. So we've just been hustling, trying to meet the need on the prevention side of things. There has been a little bit of shift in that direction, but there was something, there were over 50 bills that went through our state legislature last session related to wildfire, and only a couple of them passed and almost none of them with any funding. So we thought it was a big change up, shake up that we've long needed, and it's slower to progress on that side of things than we thought. But we have another legislative session, season coming up here in January. And what we realized is that there were a lot of people in shock, thinking like,
Mm-hmm.
how happen? And that's been the problem. I mean, we've been like rattling the cages for over 20 years, writing the community wildfire protection plans, hosting all these workshops, doing all this stuff. But unless you were in fire or forestry, or you were in a community that had been threatened a number of times, you hadn't, those are the people who were already on board and didn't need to be convinced. But the rest of everyone across the state has been pretty complacent or dismissive. And I have really come to appreciate why that is, because our fire risk, because we don't naturally have fire, it
Right.
has increased it has become like one of the most fire prone states in the US in less than one generation.
Oh,
So our
wow.
systems aren't designed for it. Our
Right.
homes, our subdivisions, even our preparedness policies at our fire departments, like nothing has caught up to the level of risk that we face. And it's because nobody grew up with wildfire here. And now it's a big deal thing, and the risk is everywhere. But we have a lot of catch up work to do in all of those ways.
So what's going to help you get that done?
Um, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of policy that we'd like to see happen. I think policy is going to really be important, policy and regulation. And I never appreciated those things before because we're a link arms and do it together and be friendly and collaborative, and it's all voluntary. And so we have community members, and it's always been all this like good feeling stuff. But I wrote the community wildfire protection plan for West Maui. I assessed all of those homes that burned. I'm the one who made it red on the map, like personally. And when I was like, what went wrong? What was my own personal or our organizational role in this? And what I realized is there's only so much you can do with no money and a bunch of senior citizen volunteers. Like, there's only so much you can do when it's like feel good potlucks trying to take on this 1 million acres of fire prone invaded landscape with no policy, no codes, no regulation, no funding. That's where the bottleneck has been, and so we're like, we need system changes. And so now I think what will open up the ability for us to do the level of the work we need to do at the scale we need, it's going to have some top down engagement and support, because the bottom up is doing everything we can, and we need to unlock some of those changes that that have been limiting our ability to really take action that we need to. So I never imagined, I mean, I have a forestry degree, like I like the community side of things, and now I'm like feeling pretty bossy with our powers that be in terms of the fact that we really need that sort of level of engagement and activity.
So do you think you're going to be able to get the level that you need from the people who are there now?
I'm not sure. I was really impressed because right, after Lahaina, our state House of Representatives quickly assembled 6 working groups to look at different pieces of of fire in general and what we needed to do moving forward, and mostly it was like in health and human services and the built environment. But there was a fire prevention working group, and they really did their homework. And I was so thrilled. Just by chance, I went over to just introduce myself and say hi. And we walked into one person's office, the chair of that working group, and our materials were scattered all over her desk. And she didn't know we were coming by. And I thought, like,
Wow.
this is what we always wanted, because in the past, we actually spent many months every year developing district by district fire history maps. Here are your fire-wise communities. Here are the risk reduction needs in your district for county council members and also for our state level legislators. We never heard back from almost anybody, even an acknowledgement that they received the materials. So after several years of spending a lot of time on that, thinking they'd care at least if we pointed to their district, it was just kind of like a non-issue for so many people. We couldn't figure out how to get the attention that it needed. And I think there are many now who are paying attention. So they did their homework, but nothing really passed. And so I'm learning my way through the political system about like, what are the things we can do better to better inform the policy, to better inform the folks voting on it, et cetera. So it's all new for us to actually even have that opportunity. So we're just running with it and learning all we can to try to influence it from that side.
Yeah. So it must have been kind of a surprise to find that uh, even with a degree in forestry and so much experience, in wildfire, that's not really the skill that you needed at this point to be successful.
Yeah, although I will say, because we've been this like really community driven, multi-stakeholder, multi-agency, underfunded kind of gritty kind of effort, um, I am used to people. And I'm realizing this is just like a different group of people. And so it is a lot of social collaboration and team building and all the things where we're really trying to like have those conversations and figure out what's going to work. So I am thankful for the fact that so much of the progress we've made without funding has been through relationship, and
Yeah.
without policy support has been through relationship. Like everything good we have going on is from collaboration and caring about each other and working together well. I hear there are turf wars and jurisdictional issues elsewhere in the US, and that is not the case here, which that is the one
Well,
thing
that's
we have.
good.
Like none of us have the full are at full capacity. None of us are at full funding. And somehow we're by magic and by being together, we're figuring a lot of this stuff out. And so I'm like, oh, a lot of those skills in the social sphere are apply. So now that there's interest from our political players and from our elected officials, I thought it was so intimidating until I start meeting with people. I'm like, oh, they're just humans. They just didn't know about this or appreciate the real risk that we're facing. And so now it's just about, it's all the same things. It's relationship building, it's education, it's some of the technical capacity building and support. It's just with a new audience that never cared about it before. So
I
I'm
see. Yeah.
that.
That's really neat. So if you were to want to clone and make a new Elizabeth Pickett to do the same thing that you do on another island or another area, what would you be training them in? Because you would probably think that they could hire for many of the skills that they need, right? They could hire people with forestry backgrounds or
Mhm.
wildfire mitigation background, but I'm not sure that you could hire for political acumen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I have the political side. I think I just have like the social abilities. And, I got into this work. I have like forestry and environmental science degrees, but in large part, what I focused on, I soon, early on in my career, I realized that the science and the technical pieces um, are limited or are dependent on our ability to talk to each other and to get along and to figure out how to get to agreement, even if it's not perfect and even if it's not everybody's first choice. You can like figure out where the overlap is and you can move forward on the things that lots of people care about and start there and then build from there. And so I ended up really focusing on that kind of social side of things and in the facilitation and in the collaboration. And I think that's the skill set that's paying off because it's true. We've hired a lot of people that are like technical mitigation specialists, and they can't navigate in this way that's like most important. And so some of our most effective staff members and personnel are the ones who are just really savvy socially. They can like meet and work with ranchers who have their priorities and their culture all the way through elected officials, and they can read that and then they can figure out how to get to something together. That's the winning skill, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe the one of the potholes there are people who own land but don't live there, don't care about anything except the future value of that land, and
Hmm.
not willing to invest in right. If you're just holding on to a lot because you think in 10 years it's going to be worth something, it's not going to be worth any more or any less if it burns down this year,
Right, right.
right? Like the
Yeah.
future value is still assured.
And there's no, I mean, and there's no sense of, yes, but if the fire burns through and then catches a whole town on fire,
Right.
what's your responsibility in that? So the other thing I've learned to appreciate is the fear of liability. I actually just
Yeah.
didn't play in that world. I didn't want to be in politics. I didn't want to be in like liability and regulation and all these things that felt negative to me. And so now I'm
Hmm.
appreciating that those are a really important part of the system that we need to be addressing. I mean, we have our potlucks with our Firewise communities, and we have really cool, like clean up your yard and we'll provide the chipper or the vegetation removal or whatever. We have these fun events and we have a lot of social stuff and we're linking arms with all of our fire departments. That is all still very important and powerful, but then we really do need to regulate. And the problem is even if we increase and make our codes all the way up to like the best wildland urban interface codes we could possibly have, we still need system factors in order to have the capacity to enforce those codes.
Sure.
So then we still need money and we still need funding to go to the right places and agencies in order to address it. And so I can't see a future that's safer without that side of the work being done. And so our role is kind of shifting where, our organization is still carrying forward all the existing programs for wildfire resilient landscapes and for fire adapted communities and firewise communities. But this is like this whole new branch of what we're working on. And I think that means that there's progress. The fact that we even have a seat at the table, the fact that these conversations are happening, I think it's about having patience, because there's risk out there right this minute. And this is like a long, slow game and a big system to kind of try to shift in a new direction. And I feel impatient, but also hopeful.
Wow. Yeah, that's probably key, right? Is that you remain optimistic and encouraged by the progress, no matter what pace it comes at.
Yeah.
Right. Tell me about it on the suppression side.
Hmm.
That's probably easier to get funding and backing for, because people, they can really imagine the threat much more than just, ripe fuels, right?
Yeah. So we have 4 county fire agencies, and then our state forestry also suppresses fire on state lands. And then we have, federal agencies, because we have National Park Service lands and we have military lands. And they are all really good at suppression. So, and they're also very suppression minded. So a huge, and then they're able to get funding. And so where the funding gaps are tend to be in the prevention world and in the preparedness and the mitigation side of things. And it wasn't really until recently, like we've really been working hard to like broaden the perspective of our fire agencies to include prevention, preparedness, mitigation, because they put water on flames, as they say it. And
Right.
and we're like, yes, but you wouldn't have to do that so much if we worked on this whole prevention and readiness mitigation side. And they're still kind of tight in their capacity, and it's been hard for them to all the way dive in. And so then they have just collaborated with us so our organization could carry forward those pieces. So it's always been in tight collaboration, but they're so focused on suppression. Even till after Lahaina, I was at a meeting with all of our fire agencies and our governor, and and the conversation was like, well, what do you need? And because our suppression folks are so suppression oriented, they were like, trucks and planes and trucks and planes. And I'm like hyperventilating. And so finally, with like 1 minute to go, I'm like, and planning and mitigation and prevention and fuels management and I like tried to get all that in my 1 minute at the end. And so we are actually actively, constantly working on getting out of the all things fire rely on suppression and all
Right.
things fire rely on the fire department. We're trying to broaden that out and say, no, land managers have a role, communities have a role, there's
Yep.
education, there's media, there's mitigation, there's like a lot of different players and parts to the system. We need codes, we need enforcement. And that has been the song we've been singing really loud in the last year, as all there's just this, this, I think it's probably worldwide or state, at least countrywide, where people just think, oh, I'm sure the fire department's working on that. But if you really know what
No,
the fire department does, they're a response organization. They're
that's
not
right.
like making sure every single, barbecue or campfire is put out. That's up to us, right? And like,
Right.
they're not making sure everybody's homes are managed and manicured and lawns mowed, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's up to us. And so we've been trying to shift that understanding away from suppression, but at the same time doing all we can to get more water resources on the ground, to get more secondary egress routes, to work on all of those notification systems and evacuation plans. We're actively supporting that side of the house, but then trying to also broaden everybody's understanding that this is a whole system. It's not all up to suppression. But yeah, they have what they need for the most part, but nobody else does.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're telling you we're too busy treating sick people to administer vaccines.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
That. I heard
Well,
that
until you find time for vaccines, you're always going to be busy treating sick people.
Yeah.
Yeah. To
Well,
get
and
ahead.
I do want to acknowledge the fact that while they haven't had the capacity or the focus to really dive into this,
Yeah.
um, they've been in lockstep with like guiding what we do, being encouraging. They've been our best cheerleaders from the side, like, good job, yeah, keep going. So
That's
they
great.
appreciate it, but that's not what they do as an agency. Like, they're the response folks.
Right. So do you think that instead of thinking of things as a fire department, it should just be a department of fire, in which case suppression would become one aspect of their responsibilities rather than their sole focus? And
Oh,
that way, right, that way you could take the stuff that you're doing and put that under the umbrella of the people who are responsible for fire overall, basically increase their scope.
I love that question. That's a really neat way to think about it. Yeah, I could see that being an important shift. And, it's sort of unheard of. We're finding out more and more. It's not very common for a nonprofit to be managing and leading all of this alone, or, in partnership with or in connection to, but really
Right,
leading and guiding and running all these programs for the state. We don't have an agency at the state level or at the county levels who are any sort of anything other than fire department. So a department of fire at the county levels or at the state level would be amazing. And we're, if not the only, one of very few states that don't have a fire marshal. And so that was one of the bills that passed last session, was to establish an office of the state fire marshal. And that'll be an important next step. The only thing is that for the entire office and 1.5 people and staff support and all of its needs for they basically funded it at 170,000 total for everything.
wow,
And we're like,
wow,
our Hawaii Tourism Authority, I don't want to
yeah,
consider the bus, but they just got 60 million. And this whole
right,
state office of fire marshal and all the things that everyone's expecting it's going to do, um, for and a whole 1.5 people, and like, if you think of what
yes.
this are,
It would have
and
to be a retired fire chief who already has a pension and can run the office out of their house without needing an office.
got it. Like, you can see that right away. So we're like, this is about
Yeah.
where the state's priorities are,
Okay.
and see that shift. And so we're hoping it is a foot in the door, though, to at least have legislation that has established that office. And now I think the goal is going to be to build that out and to phase it into what we really need it to be. And I think that's where we start to be able to have that real conversation about what would this Department of Fire or a fire marshal's office, like, what could it all include, instead of just we need to respond to medical calls, traffic accidents, and fires, like in a response kind of way, because
Right.
this conversation needs to be bigger. And we just, like I said, our systems and our policies are just now starting to realize they need to catch up to the risk that we actually have on the ground.
So I like where you're going with this, but with the comparative 170 grand versus 60 million for the tourism budget, I think that those things have to be brought into the same room,
Yeah.
right? There are cities that we know, or countries, that we I wouldn't mention, that we won't go to because we're afraid of crime there, right? There's
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I'm not going to this city, I don't want to get mugged or killed or right hung from a bridge,
Mhm.
uh, right? So that hurts tourism. So when people have a fear that a place might be
Danger.
unduly fire prone,
Yeah.
that's going to cut into tourism as well.
Yeah.
And when people decide to travel someplace and they leave all of the support systems of home and they're completely reliant on whatever the infrastructure is of the place where they're visiting, they want to feel like they're going to a safe place.
Yeah.
And I think if a place has a fire safety rating, uh, people might not want to go there if it's not rated well. So having an excellent record in terms of mitigation and fire safety could really help the tourism side.
Absolutely. And I think there's an awareness of that. I mean, it's like people come to Hawaii for its natural resources. So, of course, our tourism authority really needs to invest in making sure that our natural resources are clean and safe and functioning and healthy, because people are coming here to enjoy that. And similarly, it also needs to be safe. And then the natural resources and the fire safety all ties in together as well. And so there's a natural conversation to be had. And they're just on the heels of like getting that funding. And so I'm excited to have those conversations because I think there's natural integration, and we would welcome any kind of partnership we could develop in those directions because it's a natural fit.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
with people's morbidity, there's probably just as much interest in, ecotourism of the big burn scar as of the natural climate.
I
Um,
hadn't thought of that, but yeah,
come,
probably.
right, come see the burn scar, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and they're, I don't know if they want to develop their market for disaster tourism, um, but that would certainly not be the direction they'd gone in before when they
Yeah.
were focused on natural resources. Do you have a natural resources protection agency?
Oh yeah, I mean our state forestry does a lot of work. They're like managing all the state, natural resources and a lot of the state parks and beach areas. And then our counties all they have their parks and rec, and they're managing like the state recreate or the each county's recreational areas. We have watershed partnerships who are organizing and making sure that our watershed forests are protected and well managed, and that we're doing restoration in some of those degraded landscapes. Yeah, so there's a lot of on that side of things. There's a lot of attention because it's really so important to folks in Hawaii that our natural landscapes are protected and stewarded. Um, so, I mean, on the disaster tourism thing, I think it's just so sensitive because people lost their homes, and it's like,
Yeah.
I think like, and actually, it was kind of a crappy thing about tourism that they didn't really respect that people had just lost their lives and there were people out snorkeling when they're still looking for bodies. I mean, it was like inappropriate, and like people
Hmm.
think Hawaii is meant like it's here just for their playground, but this is a place where people have long histories and they
Yes.
live, work, and the land and waters are really like family and spirit and sustenance and all these important things. And I hope that this can also shift the conversation toward that Hawaii is its own place with its own people and its own daily lives. It doesn't just exist here for everybody to come like use. It's actually to
Yeah.
be like appreciated and respected. And yeah, I mean, there's opportunities thanks to our tragedies to start to pivot some of those conversations into some of those realities that would help us at least locally. And it might be interesting for people to come and see Hawaii for what it really is instead of stay locked up in their um you know
Hotel.
one stop hotel. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we have some cool directions we can take this into as we move forward.
Well, pretend for a minute that you could only get one more thing done in this career, of the many challenges you're focused on. What would be the one thing?
I'll have to describe around it. I don't have an easy
Okay.
answer today. We've been the only game in town, and we've been tiny, and we're a nonprofit. I would actually like to see this become a career path for lots of people so that they don't just have to work in hotels, so that they can actually feed their families and have a real life, high life quality and standard of living by doing like land management and stewardship and fire mitigation and fire prevention. Like if we could just have a whole blossoming um, industry and career paths where stewarding our landscapes and protecting communities and natural resources from fire were like it was robust, and there were lots of people in the space, and there's lots of people doing it, and it's just a way of life. I would like to see that become our future.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like, you're describing something that exists in other places, but
Mm.
really not in Hawaii yet.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe the faster way into that is through a school, like, the College of Wildfire Mitigation, Natural Resources, because people know what a school is. They're willing to put money into that. They don't know
Yeah.
what this other thing is, but at least that would create people, a workforce of people who are able to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd have a reverse thing. The workforce creates the jobs.
Yeah. I mean, we need both. I mean, there's some
Yeah,
cool things on that front, which is, we just met with a bunch of folks at the University of Hawaii and the dean of the Natural Resources College, and it looks like we're going to start developing at least a certificate program or some kind of
great.
emphasis focal degree that includes wildfire management and mitigation, which is very exciting. And so I'd also like to see our funding environment change, where everyone on the ground has enough money to actually hire students that come out of those programs.
Right.
And so it's both. And but there is a little bit of progress on the schooling side of things. It's like they were all just in initial conversations at the moment, but that is a priority coming out of the university that wasn't there before. And so we're just embracing all of this new interest because this is what we long waited for. I don't know why I never appreciated it. I was not realizing that the bad thing had to happen before people would care.
Yeah.
I thought we could do the prevention. I thought we could make a case for prevention and just do it right from the start. I'm now appreciating that a lot of the best, progress that has happened in other places came after like a tragedy or a disaster or something like that. I should have known that, but I guess I just didn't really appreciate that that's what it was going to take.
Yeah. No disaster goes wasted, right?
We're trying to make sure it doesn't. I mean, 102 people lost their lives because people were
Yep.
not taking it seriously, and we never want that to happen again.
No, we don't. Well, hopefully this has provided the motivation for the funding agencies to open the pocketbooks and fund the work that you're doing more. Hey, folks, anybody who's listening out there, send some money to Elizabeth. She needs it.
HawaiiWildfire.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're funded. We don't even have like state or county funding. We are funded entirely by competitive grants against the rest of the U.S. and by donations. And somehow
Wow.
we've been doing this off this whole time, but we're always on a shoestring budget. But like I said, we just link up with all of our fire and forestry partners and our communities, and we're getting a lot done despite that. But the times that we can insert a little bit of funding support into those efforts, they exponentially increase in their impact. So yeah, so that's kind of our funding sphere as well in terms of being a nonprofit and just trying to make this stuff happen. It'll be really cool when the government, county and state, pick it up as well and can have some dedicated funding to it. To
Yeah.
just
Well, the whole economy comes to a stop, right? When wildfire devastation comes through, right?
well, yeah,
It's
like
devastating to everything. So,
the amount of money it would have taken to manage our lands better and to prepare our communities better is so small compared to the billions
that's right.
of dollars it's going to take to recover, and the lost lives you can't get back, and the people moving away who have
Yeah.
their ties to this land, because now they can't rebuild and they can't afford it. I mean, like all of those impacts, it seems so much more worth it to just pony up a little on the prevention.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm hoping people get there, but
Okay.
I'm not
Well,
sure how it's going to go.
while Lahaina is still, in people's memories, this would be the time to hit up the state for a, 0.25% sales tax towards wildfire mitigation or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. It's on everyone's mind, and we want to make use of it best we can. And honestly, we had some assistance to get a survey out last year to basically a diversity of taxpayers, just regular folks. And there was like all in the supportive to very supportive of putting money in that direction.
Okay.
So that's good information for us to have, that when in the past they've said, well, there's no political will for that. We know there is now.
Yes,
And there's
there
a
is.
appetite for it, understanding that safety and well-being is on the line.
Yeah, it's no less important than the suppression side. In the long term, more important and more cost effective.
Yeah, if you ask me that same question about, if I could just have one thing be different, I keep my answer. But the other thing I would say is like I want to make prevention cool. Like
Yeah, right.
it's not like the cool place to be. It's not the action-packed, exciting response side. And it's like, I want to make prevention the cool thing. I think mitigation is the emergency, right? Like we need to
Right.
get that.
Mitigation, yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Suppression is the failure of mitigation.
right. And so I'm like, how do we make prevention cool? Like everybody wants to be in prevention because that's like where it's at. I would
You're
love
right.
that be another unfolding.
All right. Well, then you're going to have to get some some celebrities and some athletes to come do, prevention campaigns with you.
Yeah. Well, maybe you know some. I don't know any. But it's really cool to have some folks advocate in that direction and like start to make it the cool thing to do. Because I think that's where, I mean, just to socialize it in that way, I think we'd get a lot more movement. Because people don't currently all the way appreciate it or understand it.
Well, it's to the way they don't appreciate that a glacier is also a river,
Hmm.
right? Because it just takes forever to have anything happen. People don't,
Yeah.
you're not going to camp out by the glacier and listen to the sound of the ice moving the way you would by a stream, right? So
Right.
there has to be an incident. So perhaps thinking of it in terms of a mitigation incident versus a mitigation. Say again?
I just said I love that. I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna steal your words. We have we're putting together a local like wildfire summit that's going to take place early next year, and I've been like dreaming up what my keynote or my introduction to the whole event is going to be, and I like what you just said, so I just made a note that I'm
Okay. Every 2 months you have some kind of an incident. You call the community together. They focus on handling some region of mitigation, uh, and you serve fish.
yeah. We, nice food. It always has to be good food to it. But I
Right,
was talking, instead of saying like a wildfire event or incident or devastation, I like that idea of shifting the terminology over to like mitigation failure or prevention failure.
right.
And like, oh, this thing happened, and then we talk suppression and recovery. Like, if we just even relabel some of what's happened, I think it kind of shifts the mind.
That's the trick. New thinking, new outcomes, right?
Yeah.
That's the rumor anyway. Elizabeth,
Yeah.
absolute pleasure getting to know you, and really appreciate the work that you're doing and the enthusiasm that you bring to it, and your blind optimism in the face of politics. Uh,
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. That's the website, hawaiiwildfire.org. Did I
That's
get
it.
that right? Wow,
Yes.
I got something right today. Good. All right. I'm gonna mark that on my calendar. And it's Elizabeth Pickett. And if you find yourself in Hawaii, definitely look Elizabeth up. Don't feel bad about dropping a check on her organization as well, and helping her get the work that she's doing out to the community that she serves and to the communities around her. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting our work and also just fire in general. I appreciate all the work you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. That's Elizabeth Pickett, director of hawaiiwildfire.org. I'm Steve Wolf. You've been watching or listening to our podcast, The Firebreak. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. Till I see you next time, be careful, be safe. Don't start any wildfires. Be well.